This podcast includes real stories about real accidents, deaths, and ghost stories. Some content may be scary or upsetting for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. We do not intend to defame or misrepresent any business or individuals involved. All accounts are based on publicly available sources. Last week, we pulled back the tent flaps and we stepped into the dusty, chaotic world of the early American fair, a place where livestock, lemonade, and danger all shared the same dirt path. But that was only the beginning. Today, we are jumping forward into the next 50 years, from 1950 through the 2000s, an era where the fairs got bigger, the rides got faster, and the risks grew deadlier. In this episode, we'll uncover the hidden history of 5 decades of thrills and the horrifying moments when those thrills turned fatal. Because behind every spinning ride and flashing light, there's a story most fairs would rather forget. Welcome to Death Kiss Traveler. I'm your morbidly curious host, Marissa, and you are listening to the podcast where history, horror, hauntings, and amusement come together. By the 1950s, the war was over, families were growing, towns were thriving, and across the country you could smell the sweet, unmistakable scent of kettle corn and fried dough drifting on through the summer breeze. It was a time when the fairgrounds came alive, not just with animals and blue ribbon pies, but with music, motion, and a kind of electric wonder. The heart of the fair was still rooted in agriculture. Prize-winning pumpkins sat next to polished apples, and proud kids from 4-H clubs showcased their best sheep or steer under the watchful eye of small-town judges. Quilts, pickles, jams, homemade pride was on full display. But just beyond the barns and the produce stands, something louder, brighter, and wilder waited. Traveling carnivals crisscrossed the country, hauling giant steel contraptions that spun, flipped, and hurled riders through the air. Rides like the Tilt-A-Whirl, the Octopus, and the Scrambler weren't just novelties anymore. They were icons. You could hear them before you ever saw them. The deep mechanical hum, the bark of the ride operator yelling,
"Step right up. One more rider."
And the joyful shrieks of teenagers spinning in circles under flashing lights. The world was changing fast, and the fair was right in step with it. Music echoed from the grandstands. On some summer nights, you might hear a local polka band. On others, new rock and roll, blaring from loudspeakers or live performances as the county's newest voices filled the night air. And under it all, beneath the sound and spectacle, was a pulse, a rhythm, growth, invention, nostalgia, and the thrill of the unknown. According to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, on average, 4.5 people died each year on amusement rides between 1987 and 2000. That includes both permanent theme parks and traveling carnivals. From 1990 to 2004, 52 ride-related deaths were officially documented. About 3 to 4 lives lost each year. But here's where it gets more alarming. When you focus on fairs and carnivals, that number jumps to an average of 7 deaths annually in the 1990s alone. Let that sink in. With numbers like that, I could easily fill an entirely separate podcast just on county fair fatalities. But today, we're going to zero in on the ones you probably haven't heard of. The accidents that slip through the cracks, the stories buried in local papers, and the tragedies quietly swept under the rug. Because not all deaths make headlines. It was a bright October afternoon in 1955. The State Fair of Texas was alive with everything you'd expect from America's biggest fair. The sizzle of corn dogs, the chatter of excited families, and the mechanical whirl of carnival rides spinning under the cloudless sky. Among the biggest draws that year, the brand new Sky Wheel. This wasn't your average Ferris wheel. Towering at 92 feet, nearly 10 stories tall, it was a double wheel, 2 Ferris wheels stacked end to end on a rotating arm. It was fast, thrilling, and unforgettable. To fairgoers in 1955, it looked like something out of the future. Riders were lifted high above the fair, able to see all the way to downtown Dallas. For a 15-year-old high school girl from Memphis, Tennessee, it was the perfect way to end her day. She had traveled with her school's marching band to perform at the fair. It was a big honor, and she was beaming. According to witnesses, when she boarded the ride with her friends, they waved to their classmates below as the wheel rose into the sky. But within minutes, excitement turned to horror. At the peak of its spin, one of the passenger carriages broke loose, snapping from its supports and falling through the open air. Screams echoed across the midway as the car tumbled down toward the ground. The impact was fatal. The young band member died instantly. The ride was halted, the crowd froze, and the festive energy from the fair drained into stunned silence. News spread quickly, but not far. This tragedy never made national headlines. Perhaps it was the era, perhaps it was overshadowed by other events, or maybe like other fairground disasters, it was quietly pushed aside to protect the fair's reputation. But for those who witnessed it, for those who knew her, that fall from the Sky Wheel was unforgettable. After the accident, the Sky Wheel was shut down immediately. Investigators pointed to mechanical failure, a fault in the passenger carriage's latch system. Safety reviews followed, and fair operators made adjustments. But by then, the damage was done. The 1960s had arrived, and with it, a seismic shift swept across America's county fairs. The sweet scent of cotton candy mingled with the roar of engines, and the electric buzz of neon lights pierced the night sky. Gone were the days when fairs were just about plump pumpkins and home-baked pies. The Midway had taken over, and it was louder, faster, and more unforgiving than ever before. Rides twisted and spun with reckless abandon. The tilt-a-whirl gave way to the bone-rattling zipper, and the Ferris wheel no longer stood alone as the giant of the fairgrounds. The Himalaya and Rockoplane threw riders upside down, flinging screams into the night air. For the teenagers flooding the fairgrounds, the baby boomers hungry for escape and adrenaline, the rides weren't just attractions. They were rites of passage, a chance to flirt with danger and claim a moment of reckless freedom beneath the flashing lights. But while that music pulsed from the grandstand, sometimes country, sometimes psychedelic rock, the fair became a battlefield. Tradition clashed with rebellion. Old families watched nervously as leather-jacketed youths carved their mark. Behind the laughter, a darker story was unfolding. The fair grew bigger, the crowds thicker, the rides deadlier. Safety inspections were often mere formalities, sometimes ignored altogether. Rides that once whispered thrills now screamed peril. Maintenance was rushed. Corners were cut. The price of excitement was climbing, and not everyone would walk away. The carnival world was consolidating. Small operators disappeared, swallowed by corporate midway companies whose painted trailers rolled relentlessly from town to town, bringing with them an edge of cold, hard business that dulled the warmth of hometown charm. And the fairgrounds themselves, once a place of joy, became shadows of danger. Fights broke out in dark corners. Wallets vanished from pockets. People disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the chaos of the open road and the transient carnival life. I want to dive deep into this into another episode soon. By the time the 1970s had faded into history, the county fair had transformed into something raw and unpredictable. The hay bales and the pie contest remained, but now stood beside hydraulic monsters and roaring engines, illuminated by flickering neon that cast long shadows where no one dared to look. For those who lived through it, the fairs of the 60s and 70s were the wild frontier of the Midway, a place where freedom and fear collided, and where every thrill ride hid a whisper of danger waiting to explode. The year was 1979. We're back at the Texas State Fair, and it was in full swing. A bustling celebration of food, music, and the thrill of the Midway. Among the fair's many attractions stood the iconic Sky Ride, a sleek, aerial tramway that carried excited passengers high above the sprawling fairgrounds. The best way to describe this ride is a ski lift that went from one end of the park to the other. The ride promised sweeping panoramic views, a gentle breeze, and the kind of thrill that whispered adventure. For years, the Sky Ride had been a favorite for families and thrill seekers alike, offering a unique perspective of the vibrant fair below. On the afternoon of October 21st, crowds thronged the fairgrounds, laughter and music mixing with the scent of funnel cakes and roasted corn. The Sky Ride hummed steadily as its gondolas swinging gently between the steel towers. But the day's joy was about to be shattered. Without warning, a critical cable snapped, a steel lifeline that held dozens of gondolas in the sky. In an instant, the suspended cars, filled with screaming passengers, plummeted toward the earth from heights reaching nearly 100 feet. Chaos erupted. Fairgoers could only watch in horror as the gondolas crashed, smashing into the ground with devastating force. The screams of those trapped were swallowed by the roar of the impact. Emergency crews rushed in, pulling the injured from twisted metal and shattered glass. Among the victims were children, parents, and teenagers, lives forever altered in the blink of an eye. By the end of that tragic day, at least 4 people had lost their lives, and over 20 more were seriously injured. The joyful hum of the fair was replaced by sirens and silence. The disaster rocked not only the Texas State Fair, but the entire amusement industry. It was a wake-up call that led to stricter inspections, safety regulations. For the families who lost loved ones, and for thousands who witnessed the horror, the fall of the Sky Ride remains one of the darkest chapters in fair history. A haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest thrills come with the highest price. Cindy Holden, 22, was paralyzed from the waist down from that accident on October 21st, 1979, when the gondola she was riding plunged 85 feet down on the crowded State Fair Midway. Trial on Miss Holden's $11.6 million suit had been underway for about 2 weeks, but then settled at $3.8 million abruptly, ending the proceedings. The suit was filed against the State Fair and the ride manufacturer Von Roll Limited of Switzerland. State Fair officials and ride manufacturer officials blamed each other for the accident. During testimony, it was established that wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour and the swinging back and forth by occupants of one gondola helped cause the gondolas to hang up on a cable tower. Another gondola rammed into the first, and then a second, and then a third. When the fourth gondola hit the first 3, the middle 2 dropped to the asphalt midway. The 1980s rolled in with a flash. Neon lights cutting through the dusk, the thump of booming music spilling from the grandstands, and the unmistakable roar of the new rides twisting and looping in the sky. Towering roller coasters clawed at the clouds, their steel tracks twisting into dizzying loops that challenged even the bravest thrill seekers. The classic Ferris wheel still turned, but now it shared the sky with log flumes and wave swingers spinning riders in wild circles. The scent of fried dough mingled with something new. Deep-fried Oreos, giant turkey legs, and sugary concoctions that dazzled both kids and adults alike. Corporate logos glistened on banners, food stands, and even the rides themselves. The fair was no longer about community pride. It had become a stage for big brands, marketing campaigns, and flashy sponsorships. Music poured in the grandstands after night. Country legends, rock stars, and pop icons drew crowds that spilled over the midway. Celebrities posed for photos, wrote the rides, and added an air of glamour to the tradition rooted in rural life. Rodeos and pageants added a layer of excitement and a touch of hometown pride. Behind the scenes, safety took center stage. The 80s and 90s brought tighter regulations and stricter inspections, sparked by headlines of accidents that had rocked fairs across the country. New technologies helped operators keep rides running smoothly, but the risks of thrill remained. Families from cities and suburbs poured into the fairgrounds, eager for a taste of Americana mixed with modern entertainment. Alongside the agricultural exhibits and livestock barns, you'd find laser tag arenas, video game arcades, and a haunted house that played on fears old and new. Yet despite the dazzling lights and booming music, shadows lingered. Accidents still happened. Lives were sometimes lost or changed forever. Reminders that beneath the joy and laughter, the fair carried a darker side. As the 20th century came to a close, the county fair stood as a symbol of transformation, melding the old with the new. It was a place where tradition and innovation danced together under the bright lights, inviting all to step into a world of wonder, excitement, and just a little bit of danger. Long before it became a fixture at state fairs and theme parks around the world, the Enterprise ride was a dream born in the age of space obsession. The name itself, a tribute to the USS Enterprise from Star Trek, invoked wonder, speed, and the daring edge of the unknown. It was the 1970s. The world was hungry for thrills, and the amusement industry was ready to deliver. But with innovation came risk. The story of the Enterprise begins with two names, Anton Schwarzkopf and Huss Park Attractions. Rivals and innovators in the European amusement world. In 1972, Anton introduced a new ride, a wheel of gondolas that spun riders around like a centrifuge, then tilted them into the sky. Riders were held in place not with seatbelts or bars, but by the invisible force of physics, centrifugal force. The design was raw, bold, and dangerously efficient. That same year, Huss debuted their version, a sleeker, higher capacity model. Though they hadn't invented it, Huss secured the patent and dominated the market. The ride's haunting silhouette, a massive steel wheel slowly lifting and spinning against a cosmic backdrop, became a mainstay at fairs around the world. 20 enclosed gondolas, each able to hold two riders, a giant arm, and no restraints, just the spin. And at its peak, the Enterprise could be found on nearly every continent, towering over the Midway, with its colorful lights and painted space scenes. Children begged to ride it. Parents stood back watching with awe or dread as the wheel lifted nearly vertical and spun faster and faster. Some loved it. Others clutched the metal bars inside their gondolas and waited for it to end. There was an elegance to its operation. First, the ride spun horizontally like a lazy carousel. Then, a hydraulic arm lifted the massive circle upward, tilting it nearly 90 degrees. Riders, now nearly vertical, were pinned to their seats as if gravity had been turned off. It was supposed to be a summer evening like any other. At the Hamburger Dom, one of the largest and oldest fairs in northern Germany. The fairgrounds were packed with families, teenagers, couples weaving through the maze of lights and motion. Among them were Sigrid Christensen and Gabby Lekiewicz, both just 18 years old, friends full of life. That night they boarded a towering thrill ride called Skylab, an exact version of the Enterprise. It was one of the fair's main attractions. What no one realized was that earlier that day, a crane had been brought in to perform maintenance on a neighboring roller coaster, the Catapult. The crane operator had finished the job, but the crane itself had not been moved away. As the Skylab rose and began its spin, its gondolas reaching a height where they began brushing dangerously close with the crane's structure. With every rotation, the margin narrowed until the unthinkable happened. Metal screeched against metal. The gondolas slammed into the arm of the crane. In an instant, several of them were ripped from the ride mid-air, their passengers thrown violently into the sky. Screams echoed from across the fairgrounds as bodies plummeted nearly 49 feet to the pavement below. 7 people died that night. 6 of them, including Sigrid and Gabby, died instantly from the fall. The 7th succumbed to their injuries at the hospital. 16 others were left broken, bleeding, and traumatized. Investigators later revealed the tragic truth. The crane had been forgotten, left in the danger zone of the ride's orbit. A deadly oversight, a lapse in communication, and a permanent scar on the history of German fairs. We're back at the famed Texas State Fair on October 17th, 1983. And the ride that was spinning? A giant steel Enterprise. Among the passengers was an 18-year-old boy. His name now buried beneath headlines, but his story still lingers in the memories of those who watched the ride that day. Without warning, a gondola broke loose. It tore from the ride, crashing down to the pavement below, taking the young man's life instantly and injuring several others standing nearby. The screams of joy that once filled the fair were swallowed by panic and sirens. Federal safety officials descended on the fairgrounds, and what they found sparked alarm. Signs of fatigue, overlooked inspections, wear and tear on the ride structure, a wake-up call that came too late for a boy who never left the ride alive. It was the night before Thanksgiving, 1988. The air in Hollandale, Florida was thick with fried food and laughter. Neon lights flashed overhead as families and teenagers crowded the Broward County Fair. Everything buzzed with that kind of giddy energy that only comes once a year. Among them was 17-year-old Christy Schaffel, a bright, spirited teen from Cooper City. That night, she was there to make memories, ride the fastest rides, eat too much cotton candy, and scream through the night with her friends. She climbed aboard the Monster, a popular attraction. The Monster looked like a giant spider. 6 steel arms, each with 4 gondolas that whipped and spun riders in every direction. It was the kind of ride where your stomach flipped and you laughed the whole time. But beneath the music and motion, something was wrong. The Monster had a secret. One of his arms, just 1 out of 6, had been hiding a hairline crack, a nearly invisible flaw in the metal. It had been there for who knows how long, maybe weeks, maybe months. But someone at some point had painted over it, covered it, disguised it. Inspections were done, but not the kind that would see beneath the surface. And that night, when the Monster roared to life and started spinning, that crack began to grow. Faster, wilder, until snap. With a sickening screech of metal, one of the arms broke apart mid-spin, The gondolas still carrying riders tore loose and hurtled through the air. One gondola slammed into another. Another smashed to the ground. Christy Schaffel was killed instantly. Her ride through the night sky had become a plunge into tragedy. 6 others were badly injured, some thrown, others crushed. In the days that followed, investigators from the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission descended on the fairgrounds. What they found shocked even the most seasoned inspectors. That crack, it had been warned about 6 years earlier. The ride's manufacturer, Everly Aircraft Company, had issued bulletins back in 1982, telling operators to perform ultrasonic testing to detect the cracks in the sweep arms. But no one had. The ride passed inspection with nothing more than a coat of paint and a glance. That wasn't enough. It cost Christy her life. Christy's family filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit, not just against the carnival operator, James E. Stratt's show, but against the Broward County Fair itself. They alleged what evidence had already confirmed: neglect, oversight, and avoidable death. The CPSC issued a national warning. Every monster ride in the U.S. was shut down until it could pass rigorous testing, not visual, but scientific, with ultrasonic scans that could see what paint tried to hide. But for Everly Aircraft, it was already too late. Lawsuits, insurance spikes, a shattered reputation. By the 1990s, the company was gone, bankrupt and buried beneath the weight of its own metal. Christy never made it home that Thanksgiving. Her friends never forgot the sound of steel snapping. And the monster, it still haunts the memory of that fairground where the thrill and tragedy collided. Sometimes, what kills you isn't what you see. It's what's been painted over, waiting silently to break. And that's just a glimpse, just a fraction of the tragedies that have unfolded. These were the decades where thrill met risk, where safety standards were still learning to catch up. And the truth is, there are so many more. More names, more rides, more moments when the magic of the fair turned into a nightmare. So if you think this episode is chilling, we've just opened the gates. Thank you for listening to Death Kiss Traveler. Join me next week for part 3 of my County Fair series, as we explore even more untold stories of danger, disaster, and the forgotten souls of the fair from the last 25 years. Because at the fair, there are deadly secrets. This podcast is produced by Sunkissed Traveler. Looking for a stress-free vacation? Visit www.sun-kissedtraveler.com. See link in show notes. This podcast is written and recorded by me, Marissa Benson. All sources and show notes are linked below.